The radio crackled with static before Lieutenant Commander Jake Reaper, Morrison's voice cut through the desert night like a blade. Wildcard 6, this is Trident 11. We need close air support, grid November Bravo 7749. Multiple tangos dug in deep. How copy? The silence that followed stretched longer than combat protocol allowed. Morrison pressed his face deeper into the sand, feeling the grit bite into his cheek as enemy muzzle flashes lit up the ridge above his pinned SEAL team. 6 months of planning, 3 days of infiltration into the Zagros Mountains, and now they were trapped in a valley that intelligence had promised would be clear. Trident 11, Wildcard 6, came the reply, the voice unexpectedly calm, almost conversational. Female. Morrison's jaw tightened. In 16 years of special operations, he'd worked with plenty of female pilots, but something about this voice, too steady, too confident for someone about to fly into what satellite imagery had revealed as a hornet's nest of surface-to-air missiles. Understand you need party favors at the coordinates. Stand by for my approach. Morrison keyed his radio again. Wildcard 6, be advised, heavy AAA in the area. Recommend high-altitude precision strikes only. This valley is a graveyard. A pause, then impossibly what sounded like quiet laughter. Copy that, Trident, I'll keep that in mind. Petty Officer Collins, Morrison's radio operator, looked up from his scope with confusion etched across his face. Sir, I'm not showing any aircraft on approach. AWACS is silent, and the strike package isn't supposed to be here for another 40 minutes. Morrison was about to respond when the sound hit them. Not the familiar thunder of an F-18 Super Hornet or the distinctive whine of an A-10 Warthog, but something else entirely. Something that made the hair on his neck stand up, a whisper of displaced air that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Collins grabbed Morrison's arm, his voice dropping to an urgent whisper. Boss, you seeing this? Morrison lifted his night vision goggles and followed Collins' pointing finger toward the ridgeline. What he saw there made his breath catch in his throat. Emerging from the cloud cover like a phantom materialized from shadow itself was an aircraft that shouldn't exist, angular, impossibly smooth, its faceted surfaces drinking in the moonlight and giving back nothing. The F-117 Nighthawk had been retired from active service 8 years ago, every airframe either destroyed or relegated to museum display. Yet there it was, banking into a shallow dive with the fluid grace of a hunting falcon, its stealth configuration rendering it nearly invisible against the star-drunk sky. Morrison had seen plenty of combat aircraft in his career, but watching this ghost ship emerge from the darkness felt like witnessing something mythical, a dragon descending from the heavens, silent and deadly. The enemy gunfire that had been hammering their position suddenly ceased, as if the fighters above had also spotted the impossible visitor and weren't quite sure what to make of it. Trident 11, came that same calm voice, now crystal clear through their communications. I've got eyes on your little problem. Recommend you keep your heads down for the next 60 seconds. This might get interesting. Morrison found himself whispering into his radio, his voice barely audible even to himself. Wildcard 6, what the hell are you flying? The response came back immediate, carrying just the faintest hint of amusement. Something that isn't supposed to be here, Trident. But then again, neither are you. As the F-117 completed its turn and lined up for what appeared to be an impossibly low-altitude attack run, Morrison realized that everything he thought he knew about this mission, hell, about aviation itself, was about to change. The night air seemed to hold its breath, waiting for whatever came next. Above them, the ghost ship dove toward Earth like a falling star made of titanium and secrets. Collins pressed closer to Morrison, his voice tight with disbelief. Sir, whoever's flying that thing is either completely insane or the best pilot I've ever seen. Morrison kept his eyes locked on the descending aircraft, watching it slice through the darkness with surgical precision. Maybe both, he murmured, but something in that female voice suggested neither insanity nor recklessness. What he'd heard was something far more dangerous, absolute confidence backed by skill he couldn't begin to fathom. The F-117's engines, already whisper-quiet, seemed to fade to nothing as it approached the target zone. It was as if the aircraft itself was holding its breath, becoming one with the night sky that had birthed it. Morrison had called in hundreds of airstrikes during his career, but he'd never seen anything like this. The Nighthawk wasn't just flying, it was hunting. Trident 11 coming in hot. Keep those pretty heads of yours down. The voice carried a hint of something Morrison couldn't quite place. Not arrogance, but a kind of weary professionalism that spoke of battles fought and won in places that didn't officially exist. He found himself wondering who this pilot was, how she'd gotten her hands on a supposedly retired stealth fighter, and why she was here in the middle of nowhere, pulling their asses out of a fire that intelligence had sworn wouldn't exist. The first indication that death was coming from above wasn't the sound of weapons release. The F-117's bomb bay doors opened and closed with barely a whisper. Instead, it was the way the enemy gunfire simply stopped, as if someone had thrown a switch. One moment the ridge was alive with muzzle flashes and the angry chatter of AK-47s, and the next there was only silence broken by the distant rumble of precision munitions finding their targets. The explosions, when they came, were surgical in their precision. No massive fireballs or Hollywood pyrotechnics, just efficient, professional destruction that eliminated threats without disturbing so much as a pebble near the SEAL team's position. Morrison had seen good pilots before, but this was something else entirely. This was artistry written in smoke and fire across the desert night. Trident 11, threat neutralized. You're clear to continue your mission. Morrison keyed his radio, his professional composure barely masking his amazement. Outstanding work, Wildcard 6. That was some of the finest precision bombing I've ever witnessed. What's your ETA back to base? The silence stretched long enough that Morrison began to wonder if they'd lost communication. When the voice finally returned, it carried a note of something that might have been sadness. No base to return to, Trident. This bird and I were both officially retired. Just happened to be in the neighborhood when you called for help. Before Morrison could respond, the F-117 banked sharply and began climbing toward the cloud cover, its angular silhouette already beginning to fade back into the darkness from which it had emerged. Within moments, it was gone as completely as if it had never existed at all, leaving only the fatting whisper of jet engines and the acrid smell of high explosives drifting down from the ridge. Collins lowered his night vision goggles and looked at Morrison with the expression of a man who'd just witnessed something that would haunt his dreams for years to come. "Sir, did that really just happen?" Morrison studied the now-quiet ridge, where small fires still burned in the positions that moments before had been bristling with enemy fighters. The precision of the strike was almost supernatural, every threat eliminated, every SEAL position left untouched, as if the pilot had been able to see through the darkness and chaos with the eyes of a god. "Yeah," he said quietly, his voice carrying a mixture of gratitude and bewilderment. "It happened, but I'm pretty sure no one's going to believe us when we get back." As the SEAL team prepared to continue their mission, Morrison found himself looking up at the empty sky, wondering if he just encountered a guardian angel or something far more mysterious. The night air still seemed to vibrate with the memory of the ghost ship's passage, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just witnessed something that would change everything he thought he knew about war, technology, and the thin line between myth and reality. The radio remained silent, but somehow Morrison knew their mysterious savior was still out there somewhere, flying through the darkness in an aircraft that wasn't supposed to exist, carrying secrets that would never see the light of day. 2 hours later, as Morrison's team reached their extraction point without further incident, he filed his after-action report with careful attention to detail. Everything was documented with military precision: enemy positions, casualties inflicted, mission parameters met. Everything except the part about the ghost ship and its enigmatic pilot. Some stories, Morrison realized, were too important to tell through official channels. Some stories needed to be preserved in the memories of those who lived them, passed down through whispered conversations in dive bars near military bases, becoming the stuff of legend rather than official record. As the extraction helicopter lifted off into the pre-dawn darkness, Morrison found himself scanning the sky one more time, hoping for another glimpse of the impossible aircraft. But the night sky held its secrets close, revealing nothing but stars and the promise of sunrise still hours away. Wherever Wildcard 6 had gone, she'd taken her mysteries with her, leaving behind only questions and the kind of gratitude that runs deeper than words. The helicopter banked toward friendly territory, carrying 6 SEALs who would never again look at the night sky quite the same way. They'd been touched by something extraordinary, something that existed in the spaces between official truth and impossible reality. And in the months and years that followed, when other operators shared their own stories of mysterious aircraft and guardian angels, Morrison would nod knowingly and buy another round of drinks. Because some angels, he'd learned, wore pilots' wings and flew retired stealth fighters through the darkness, appearing when hope seemed lost and vanishing before gratitude could be properly expressed. And sometimes, in a world full of shadows and secrets, that was exactly the kind of miracle that mattered most. The desert below slowly gave way to friendly territory, but Morrison's thoughts remained fixed on that moment when death had descended from above with surgical precision and artistic grace, guided by a voice that had spoken with the calm authority of someone who'd learned to make the impossible look routine. He would never see Wildcard 6 again, but he would never forget her either. Major Cassandra Ghost Volkov had been flying for 18 hours straight when the emergency call came through on the old frequency. She'd been running maintenance flights on the F-117 that the Air Force didn't know still existed, testing systems and keeping skills sharp for reasons she couldn't fully explain even to herself. The aircraft was supposed to be in a museum in Ohio, its stealth capabilities relegated to historical footnote status. Instead, it lived in a hangar that didn't appear on any official maps, maintained by a crew that had followed her into unofficial retirement. The call from the SEALs had pierced through her routine like a prayer answered before it was spoken. For 3 years, she'd been flying ghost missions over empty desert, keeping the Nighthawk operational and her skills current while the military establishment pretended she no longer existed. The official story was that Major Cassandra Volkov had suffered a psychological breakdown during her final deployment, had been medically retired with full honors, and now lived quietly somewhere in the American Southwest. The truth was more complicated and far more classified than her personnel file would ever indicate. Cassandra banked the F-117 through a series of lazy S-turns as she climbed toward cruising altitude, the familiar weight of G-forces pressing her deeper into the ejection seat that had become more home than any apartment or base housing she'd ever occupied. The Nighthawk responded to her touch like a living thing, its fly-by-wire systems translating her intentions into motion with the fluid grace of a dancer who'd been rehearsing the same routine for 20 years. She'd been flying since she was 16, washing dishes at a small airport in Montana to pay for lessons from a crusty old Vietnam vet who'd seen something in her that even she hadn't recognized at the time. By 18, she was logging more hours than pilots twice her age. By 25, she was the youngest female pilot ever selected for the F-117 program. By 32, she was a major with more classified missions under her belt than anyone in the Air Force was comfortable discussing. And then came the mission that changed everything. The details were locked away in files that required presidential authorization to access, but the aftereffects had rippled through the defense establishment like seismic waves. Officially, Major Volkov had suffered combat stress reaction during a routine training exercise. Unofficially, She'd stumbled onto something that powerful people desperately wanted to remain buried. The compromise had been elegant in its simplicity. She would disappear from active service, but the aircraft and her unique skills would remain available for situations that required absolute deniability. The arrangement suited everyone involved. The Air Force got to maintain plausible deniability about stealth capabilities that weren't supposed to exist anymore. The intelligence community got an asset that could operate completely outside official channels. And Cassandra got to keep flying the only aircraft that had ever truly understood her, even if it meant living in the shadows between acknowledged reality and convenient fiction. She leveled off at 30,000 feet and trimmed the aircraft for cruise flight, her hands moving across the controls with the unconscious precision of someone who performed these actions thousands of times before. Below her, the desert stretched away in all directions, empty and eternal under the star-drunk sky. Most pilots found the emptiness unsettling, but Cassandra had always found peace in the vast spaces between destinations. The desert didn't judge, didn't question, didn't demand explanations for choices that couldn't be explained to anyone who hadn't lived them. The radio remained silent, which meant the SEALs were either dead or had completed their mission successfully. In Cassandra's experience, special operations teams were remarkably difficult to kill permanently, so she assumed they were currently hiking toward their extraction point with whatever intelligence they'd been sent to collect. The precision of her strike had been textbook, every threat neutralized, every friendly position preserved, no collateral damage to complicate the post-mission briefing. It was the kind of flying that had made her reputation back when she'd had an official reputation to maintain. Clean, professional, surgical in its application of overwhelming force. The kind of flying that had earned her the call sign, Ghost, long before the Air Force had decided to make her one in truth as well as name. She checked her fuel gauge and calculated flight time back to the hangar that didn't exist on any maps. Plenty of gas remaining, which meant she could take the long way home, maybe run a few practice approaches over the mountain ranges that had become her private training ground. The F-117 was getting old. Hell, they were both getting old. But the aircraft still flew like a dream, still responded to her touch with the eager precision of a thoroughbred racehorse. Sometimes, in moments like this, with the stars above and the desert below, and the familiar vibration of twin turbofans pushing her through the thin air at 30,000 feet, Cassandra could almost forget about the life she'd left behind. Almost forget about the career that had been sacrificed on the altar of national security, the relationships that had withered under the weight of secrets she couldn't share, the official identity that had been buried so deep that sometimes she wondered if Major Cassandra Volkov had ever really existed at all. But then she would remember the sound of gratitude in that SEAL commander's voice, the knowledge that 6 men were going home to their families, because she'd been in the right place at the right time with the right aircraft and the right skills. And in those moments, the sacrifices seemed worthwhile, the exile bearable, the loneliness a small price to pay for the ability to make a difference when it mattered most. The stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns, indifferent to human struggles and secret wars. But Cassandra had learned to find comfort in their indifference, to take strength from the knowledge that some things endured regardless of politics or policy, or the classified memoranda that shaped the hidden corners of the defense establishment. She was a ghost now, officially and literally, but ghosts, she discovered, had their own kind of power. 3 days after the mountain rescue, Lieutenant Commander Morrison found himself in a secure briefing room at Bagram Air Base, facing a colonel whose uniform bore no identifying patches and whose nameplate read simply, "Classified." The after-action debriefing had been routine, until Morrison mentioned the unscheduled close air support that had saved his team's lives. "Walk me through that again, Commander," the colonel said, his voice carrying the kind of flat authority that came from years of dealing with information that could destabilize governments. "You're telling me that an F-117 Nighthawk provided close air support for your operation?" Morrison kept his expression neutral, though every instinct told him he was walking through a minefield of implications he couldn't fully grasp. That's correct, sir. The aircraft appeared at approximately 2:45 hours and eliminated hostile positions with precision-guided munitions. The pilot identified herself as Wildcard 6. The colonel made a note on a tablet that Morrison couldn't see. And you're certain it was an F-117? Positive identification, sir. I've seen enough aircraft to know a Nighthawk when I see one, even in low-light conditions. Another note. The colonel's expression remained carefully neutral, but Morrison caught something flickering behind his eyes, recognition, perhaps, or concern. This pilot, Wildcard 6, did she provide any additional identification? Unit designation, base of origin, anything that might help us track down how a retired aircraft ended up in your operational area? Morrison chose his words carefully. She indicated that both she and the aircraft were officially retired, sir. Said she was just in the neighborhood when we called for help. The colonel set down his tablet and studied Morrison with the kind of intense focus usually reserved for enemy prisoners under interrogation. Commander, I want you to listen very carefully to what I'm about to tell you. The F-117 Nighthawk was officially retired from active service 8 years ago. Every airframe was either destroyed or transferred to permanent museum display. There are no F-117s in operational status anywhere in the world. With respect, sir, I know what I saw. I'm sure you do. The colonel leaned back in his chair, his expression softening slightly. The question is what we do with that knowledge. You're familiar with compartmentalized information protocols. Morrison nodded. In his line of work, operational security wasn't just a bureaucratic requirement. It was a matter of life and death for operators in the field. Yes, sir. Good. Then you'll understand when I tell you that certain assets remain available for deployment under specific circumstances, even when those assets are officially listed as non-operational. The details of such arrangements are classified at levels that would require congressional oversight to access. The implications were becoming clear. Morrison had stumbled into something that existed in the gray areas between official policy and operational necessity, where deniability was more important than accountability and results mattered more than regulations. Are you saying that Wildcard 6 is an authorized asset? The colonel's smile was thin and entirely without humor. I'm saying that your mission was completed successfully with 0 casualties to friendly forces. The hostile positions that were threatening your team have been neutralized with surgical precision, and you extracted on schedule with your objectives met. Everything else is speculation. Morrison understood the message. In the world of special operations, there were truths that could be spoken and truths that had to be lived with in silence. The existence of ghosts like Wildcard 6 fell firmly into the latter category. Understood, sir. I hope so, Commander, because the alternative to understanding is spending the rest of your career in assignments that don't require security clearances. The colonel stood, indicating the briefing was over. Your team performed admirably under difficult circumstances. The successful completion of this mission will be noted in your service records. As Morrison prepared to leave, the colonel called him back. One more thing, Commander. If you should happen to encounter Wildcard 6 again during future operations, you're authorized to accept whatever assistance she offers, but any such encounters remain strictly compartmentalized. Are we clear? Crystal clear, sir. Walking back to his temporary quarters, Morrison found himself wondering about the woman behind the call sign. Who was she? How had she come to fly an aircraft that didn't officially exist? What had she sacrificed to become a guardian angel for operators like his team? The questions multiplied faster than answers, creating a puzzle that he suspected was designed never to be solved. But one thing was certain. Somewhere out there, in the vast spaces between official truth and operational reality, Major Cassandra Volkov was still flying her impossible missions in an aircraft that had been consigned to museum displays and historical footnotes. She was a ghost in the most literal sense, maintaining vigilance over operators who would never know her name or understand the sacrifices she'd made to keep them alive. The desert night held its secrets close, but Morrison had learned to be grateful for the mysteries that protected him and his men. Some angels wore pilots' wings and spoke with the calm authority of absolute competence. And sometimes, when the situation was desperate enough and the cause was just enough, those angels descended from the darkness to rain surgical destruction on America's enemies. It was enough to know that she was out there, watching over warriors who walked in harm's way for causes larger than themselves. It was enough to know that when hope seemed lost and death pressed close, a voice might crackle through the radio waves with the promise of salvation, delivered at precisely the right moment in precisely the right way. Morrison looked up at the star-filled sky and whispered a prayer of gratitude to whatever forces had put Wildcard 6 in the right place at the right time. Somewhere above the clouds, a ghost was flying home. The hangar sat in a valley that didn't appear on any maps, nestled between rock formations that made satellite surveillance difficult and aerial reconnaissance nearly impossible. From the outside, it looked like any of a dozen abandoned mining operations that dotted the American Southwest, corrugated metal buildings slowly succumbing to desert weather, surrounded by the kind of emptiness that discouraged casual visitors. Inside, however, the hangar hummed with the quiet efficiency of a world-class maintenance facility. The F-117 Nighthawk sat in the center of the space like a sleeping predator, its angular surfaces drinking in the LED lighting and giving back nothing but shadows. Ground crew moved around the aircraft with the careful precision of surgeons, checking systems and performing maintenance routines that hadn't appeared in official manuals for nearly a decade. Cassandra completed her post-flight checklist with the same methodical attention to detail that had kept her alive through 237 combat missions. Every switch returned to its proper position, every system powered down in the correct sequence, every indicator light verified before she finally shut down the engines and began the process of climbing out of the cockpit that had been her second home for more years than she cared to count. Chief Master Sergeant Tommy Rodriguez was waiting for her at the bottom of the boarding ladder, his weathered face creased with the kind of smile that spoke of shared secrets and mutual respect earned through years of dangerous work, accomplished flawlessly. Rodriguez had been maintaining F-117 since the program's classified inception, and when Cassandra had been officially retired, he'd chosen to follow her into whatever came after official service. "How'd she fly tonight, Major?" Cassandra pulled off her helmet and ran her fingers through hair that had been compressed by 6 hours of flight operations. "Like a dream, Chief. Whatever magic you're working on the flight control systems, keep it up." Rodriguez's smile widened. "No magic, ma'am. Just 35 years of experience and the finest maintenance crew this side of Area 51. The comparison to Area 51 wasn't entirely accidental. 3 of Rodriguez's technicians were former Groom Lake personnel who'd grown tired of working on projects that would never see operational deployment. Here, in a hangar that didn't exist on any official records, they maintained an aircraft that had been declared obsolete by bureaucrats who'd never understood what made the Nighthawk special in the first place. "Any word from our friends about tonight's festivities?" Rodriguez shook his head. "Radio silence since you landed, but that's normal for operations like this. No news is good news in our line of work." Cassandra nodded, though part of her wished she could know how the SEAL team's mission had concluded. In her active duty days, she'd often received mission reports that detailed the strategic impact of her strikes. Now, operating in the shadows between official acknowledgement and operational necessity, she had to be satisfied with the knowledge that she'd done her job professionally, and that 6 men were probably alive who might otherwise have come home in flag-draped coffins. It was enough, she told herself. It had to be enough. "Major," Rodriguez's voice carried a note of concern that immediately focused her attention. "We received a coded transmission about an hour ago. Looks like we might have another mission coming up sooner rather than later." Cassandra felt the familiar mixture of anticipation and dread that preceded dangerous work. What kind of mission? The kind that requires an aircraft that doesn't officially exist and a pilot who's been officially retired. Rodriguez handed her a tablet displaying an encrypted message that had been decoded using algorithms that were themselves classified above top secret. "Looks like someone in Syria has been making friends with some very unfriendly people." Cassandra scanned the mission parameters, her mind automatically calculating flight times, fuel requirements, and weapons loads. The target was a compound in the Aleppo province where intelligence suggested a high-value target was meeting with representatives from 3 different terrorist organizations. The mission window was narrow, 18 hours to plan, execute, and extract before the target relocated to a position where he'd be surrounded by civilian shields. "What's our authorization level?" Rodriguez's expression grew grim. "Presidential finding, classified at levels that require biometric identification to access. This one comes from the very top, Major. No official oversight, no congressional notification, no paper trail that leads back to anyone with a recognizable name." The implications were clear. This wasn't just another ghost mission. This was the kind of operation that could reshape regional power balances if it succeeded, or trigger international incidents if it failed. The kind of mission that required absolute deniability and surgical precision, applied with overwhelming force. "Time to target. 36 hours if we launch at 600 tomorrow. Weather looks good, and we've got a satellite window that should keep us invisible until we're already over the target area." Cassandra handed back the tablet and looked at the F-117, her mind already working through approach vectors and escape routes. The aircraft seemed to sense her attention, its angular surfaces reflecting the hangar lights in patterns that suggested barely contained energy waiting to be unleashed. "Chief, I want a full systems check and weapons load by 400. This one's going to be different from the mountain rescue. We're going deep into hostile territory with no backup and no official support. If something goes wrong, we're completely on our own." Rodriguez nodded grimly. "Just like the old days, Major." "Yeah," Cassandra said quietly, her voice carrying the weight of memories that couldn't be shared with anyone who hadn't lived them. "Just like the old days." As the maintenance crew began preparing the aircraft for its next mission, Cassandra walked to her quarters, a simple room adjacent to the hangar that contained everything she owned that mattered. A narrow bed, a desk covered with technical manuals and weather charts, and a single photograph showing her standing next to an F-117 on a runway that had been demolished years ago. She sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the photograph, remembering the woman she'd been before the world had become complicated by secrets and shadows. That woman had believed in clear missions and unambiguous victories, in a military structure where excellence was rewarded and service was honored. That woman had thought she was fighting for democracy and freedom, and all the ideals that made military service meaningful. This woman knew better. This woman understood that the real battles were fought in the spaces between official truth and operational necessity, where victory was measured not in territory captured or enemies defeated, but in disasters prevented and civilians protected. It was messier work, morally ambiguous and psychologically demanding, but it was also more important than anything she'd done while wearing an official uniform. Tomorrow, she would climb back into the cockpit of an aircraft that didn't exist and fly a mission that would never be acknowledged. She would deliver precision death to people who represented genuine threats to American interests and global stability. And when she returned, if she returned, there would be no medal ceremonies or commendation letters, no official recognition or public gratitude. There would only be the knowledge that she'd done what needed to be done, in the way it needed to be done, by someone uniquely qualified to do it. In a world full of shadows and moral compromise, it was the closest thing to heroism that circumstances allowed. Cassandra set the photograph aside and began reviewing the mission briefing materials. Somewhere in Syria, a high-value target was planning operations that would kill innocent people in service of ideological hatred. Tomorrow night, that planning would be permanently interrupted by precision munitions delivered from an aircraft that existed only in the space between myth and classified reality. The desert wind howled outside the hangar, carrying sand and secrets across landscape that had witnessed the rise and fall of empires. But inside the hidden facility, a ghost prepared for another mission that would never appear in any official record, guided by principles that transcended politics and service commitments that ran deeper than any formal oath. Some battles, Cassandra had learned, were worth fighting even when no one would ever know they'd been fought. Some victories were worth achieving even when they could never be celebrated. And some warriors were willing to become ghosts if that's what it took to protect the light from the encroaching darkness. Tomorrow's mission would require everything she'd learned in 20 years of flying the world's most sophisticated combat aircraft. But tonight, she would study and plan and prepare with the methodical precision that had kept her alive through operations that existed only in the memories of those who'd lived them. Outside, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, indifferent to human struggles and secret wars. But Cassandra had made her peace with indifference, had learned to find purpose in the spaces where official acknowledgement couldn't reach. She was a guardian angel who flew without wings, a protector who operated beyond the reach of oversight or recognition. She was exactly what the world needed, even if the world could never know she existed. The Syrian mission launched at 5:47 hours under a crescent moon that provided just enough illumination for visual navigation, without compromising the F-117 stealth characteristics. Cassandra had been airborne for 3 hours, flying a route that took her through international airspace and around radar installations that might detect even the Nighthawk's minimal signature if they were looking in exactly the right place at exactly the right time. The intelligence briefing had been thorough but troubling. The target compound housed a meeting between Hakim al-Rashid, a financier who'd been funding terrorist operations across 3 continents, and representatives from organizations that preferred to remain anonymous but whose activities had left bloody footprints across the Middle East and Europe. The window for interdiction was narrow. Satellite surveillance indicated the meeting would conclude within 6 hours, after which the participants would scatter to locations where they'd be surrounded by civilian shields. Wildcard 6, this is Overwatch, came the voice through her encrypted communications system. The controller's identity was classified, his location unknown, his existence officially deniable. Target area is active. Count multiple vehicles and heat signatures consistent with your briefing materials. Cassandra adjusted her heading slightly, trimming the aircraft for the approach that would take her over the target coordinates at exactly the right altitude and speed for weapons release. Copy, Overwatch. I'm showing clear skis and optimal release parameters. The Syrian desert unfolded below her like a tapestry woven from moonlight and shadow. She'd flown over this terrain dozens of times during her official service, but tonight felt different. Tonight, she was operating completely outside the chain of command, answerable only to controllers whose names she didn't know and authorization that came from sources she couldn't verify. It was the purest form of warfare she'd ever experienced. Individual skill and judgment applied with surgical precision against targets that represented genuine threats to global stability. Wildcard 6, be advised, we're tracking mobile SAM units in your operating area. Recommend maximum stealth protocols and rapid egress after weapons release. Cassandra's hands moved across her controls with practiced efficiency, adjusting systems that would minimize her already minimal radar signature. The F-117 had been designed to operate in exactly these conditions: hostile airspace, sophisticated air defense systems, targets that required precision engagement rather than overwhelming force. Copy Overwatch. I'm configured for maximum stealth. What's the latest intelligence on civilian presence in the target area? A pause that stretched long enough to make her pulse quicken. Negative civilian presence confirmed. Target compound is isolated, and thermal imaging shows no heat signatures consistent with non-combatant personnel. Relief flooded through her. Civilian casualties were the nightmare that haunted every precision strike pilot, the variable that could transform a successful mission into a war crime regardless of intentions or legal authorizations. Knowing that the target area was clear of innocents allowed her to focus entirely on the technical aspects of weapons delivery. Understood, beginning terminal approach now. The compound appeared on her targeting display as a cluster of geometric shapes arranged around a central courtyard. Intelligence had identified the main building as the meeting location, with secondary structures housing security personnel and support staff. Her weapons load consisted of 4 precision-guided munitions, each capable of destroying a building while leaving adjacent structures intact. Wildcard 6, you are cleared hot. Repeat, cleared hot. Cassandra felt the familiar calm that descended during the final moments before weapons release. 20 years of combat flying had taught her to compartmentalize emotion, to focus entirely on the technical precision required for successful target engagement. There would be time for reflection later, time to consider the human cost of the destruction she was about to unleash. Right now, there was only the aircraft, the target, and the mathematical relationship between velocity, altitude, and weapons trajectory. Target acquired, weapons away. The F-117 shuddered slightly as 4 precision munitions separated from their pylons and began their descent toward the compound below. Cassandra banked sharply and began her egress climb, gaining altitude and distance while her weapons completed their terminal guidance phase. Behind her, thermal blooms appeared on her rear-facing sensors as the munitions found their targets with the surgical precision that had made the Nighthawk legendary among those cleared to know of its capabilities. Outstanding work, Wildcard 6. All targets eliminated. No collateral damage detected. The compound that had housed some of the world's most dangerous terrorists was now a collection of precisely destroyed buildings, surrounded by desert that remained undisturbed. The meeting that might have planned attacks killing hundreds or thousands of innocent people had been permanently adjourned by 4 precision munitions delivered from an aircraft that didn't officially exist. Copy Overwatch, egressing target area now. As the F-117 climbed toward cruising altitude, Cassandra allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. The mission had been executed flawlessly, target destroyed, no civilian casualties, no compromise of operational security. Somewhere in Syria, terrorist financiers,